I am not a financial advisor and have no professional experience in finance. Do not take anything in this video as financial advice, as it is only opinion and speculation. This channel and video are sponsored by the XX network, so I am biased towards the XX network. Fear of ridicule begets the worst of cowardice.
So we looked at those aspects from a stability perspective. We had a number of central banks, including the Financial Stability Board, that worked with us in that group. So for them, stability obviously is very important. But we also looked at how can we create something that is akin to a global currency or a global payment system, even though we know we don't have one. And we also all agree that Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies are not going to be the global payment currency. We have sovereigns, we have all the things that are happening, and we also see several central banks experimenting with new technology about how they can maybe cross-interact with each other. But again, people would still maintain their distinct currencies.
This week, the IMF just released this paper in November 2022, and they're setting up a multi-currency exchange and contracting platform, which is a fancy way of saying they want a global ledger to get rid of nostro and vostro and correspondent banking. They're trying to merge messaging and settlement. And what I found particularly interesting about this is they talk about it in trustless environments. So they want to have escrows and smart contracts and have a global ledger.
You see IMF holding crypto assets in the future? Oh, they're over here. That's easier. You want to take one? Go for it. The first one's for you. IMF. Do you see IMF holding crypto assets in the future? I did not put that up there.
This 2018 clip has been circulating for a while, but it's still very insightful. The rapport that Brad has with Ross Lecklow from the IMF, the body language, it's all very telling.
One concept is sort of more the settlement coin within the central banks between the actual commercial bank, settlement coin within the central banks between the actual commercial bank.
Dr. Ruth Wandhofer is a PhD and expert who has had a successful career in banking. At first she says they want to build a global settlement system, but they all agree it shouldn't be Bitcoin or Ethereum. Now she tells you that one of the designs they have planned out has a global settlement coin.
And the other idea of synchronization is something where some central banks are actively exploring new technologies and thinking about how they could sort of work cross-border.
Ruth mentions a synchronized cross-border payment system. Now, the ECB and Bank of Japan created a project called Project Stella, which uses Interledger Protocol. So they tested out Interledger Protocol for this project.
And of course, technology always plays a role, but the key learning from this research really is not only do we understand better what the problems are, but we also know that technology itself cannot fix the problem. It has to have a business case, it has to have a governance, and it has to have that network. And that's why we feel an area which has already built network over time with the governance is more likely to be able to build things on top of that network and still allowing that competition in the customer to bank level.
She also wrote a paper for the SWIFT community called The Future of Correspondent Banking and Cross-Border Payments. And in this document, she talks about the arrival of new technologies such as DLT and digital tokens or cryptocurrencies. The question is whether we may be able to create a tool that would deliver a global payment system that is fit for a global market. She also gives credit to Ryan Zagone as well as Marcus Treacher as the contributor list for this paper. So right here it says Marcus Treacher and Ryan Zagone from Ripple, the contributors to the focus group.
How about we have some global settlement utility that sort of takes out the counterparty risk in settlement, at least for high-value transactions, a little bit like what we've developed many years ago with CLS on the FX side. Again, that is a very complicated model to achieve in practice because you would be working with lots of different regulatory regimes, governance, changes to work process flows within the banks, but you would achieve obviously settlement finality in central bank money.
In another interview, she talks about, but the new fintech wave could become a destructive tsunami of unprecedented proportions without the right blend of forward thinking and collaboration between innovative startups, incumbents, and regulators, believes Ruth. Get it right, though, and the potential rewards are equally mind-boggling. How far have we become as an industry as a whole after radical innovations like Bitcoin and a phase of death visions by disruption? All eyes are now on partnerships and value creation, finally, she says. So partnerships and value creation from the private sector to the public sector.
The private sector should participate and bring its ability to innovate, while the public sector would supervise.
This is Bo Li. He's the Deputy Managing Director of the IMF. He comes from the People's Bank of China. As you know, China is favorable towards central bank digital currencies.
To distribute, to serve the population. So we think a successful CBDC ecosystem has to be built on a PPP, right? Public-private partnership. Now the question comes, how to make this ecosystem attractive to private sector players? That's a challenge. Because if you think about it, how to make this a profitable business for private players? And we have seen this challenge in many of our member countries. And one idea we have, in fact, several of our members are also experimenting, is data. Because digital payment generates a lot of data, and this data can be very...
Bo Li is discussing the possibility of allowing the private sector to spy on all of your financial transactions. In some parts of the world, such as China, this may be the norm. However, that is not the case in places like Switzerland. This is why Switzerland is working with David Cham from the XX network to build privacy into their digital currency. Every nation has different norms, and this is the beauty of federated sidechains. Countries can create their own systems according to their cultural values and then link up on a cross-border platform. Switzerland's economy has thrived over the years because they value privacy. Project Tourbillon has comparable features of quantum-secure cryptography, mixing, and linear scalability to the XX network. However, the Swiss regulators need to enable privacy features for the sender, but not the recipient, in order to comply with banking laws.
The number of correspondent banks globally has fallen by about a quarter over the last decade. This hurts regular people. When a migrant worker pays 7 out of every $100 she sent back to her home country in fees, that hurts her family. It also leaves small exporters less capital to grow their businesses and hire workers.
As correspondent banks are de-risking, meaning they are withdrawing services, Ripple has worked to provide liquidity and ODL users in an area like the Philippines where de-risking is occurring. De-risking occurs when the banks withdraw services due to reasons like illiquid currency pairs, AML and KYC fines, and reputational risks.
A promising path is multilateral cross-border payment platforms that combine new forms of central bank digital currency with new technology, as the IMF, among others, has suggested. These platforms could shorten transaction chains and improve security, as central bank money would be available for settlement. And additional functionalities could be added, such as centralized FX markets that are native to these platforms and could reduce the high costs of exchanging currencies.
Correspondent banking is an intricate system of credits and debts. When a customer gives their bank $100, the banks record it as a liability. Banks mix and match liabilities and assets to create balanced books. However, when sending a cross-border payment, the system becomes much more complex with credits and debits. A central bank digital currency is not a debt of any bank. Even with cashless transactions, there's still a need of a system of debts and credits. That is what makes the XRP ledger unique. Central banks could support gateways on the XRP ledger. An entire complex system could have central bank money as a foundation.
Remember, I'm from the legal department. I'm supposed to be very conservative about these things.
Having a common hub where countries' fast payment systems can connect may be much more efficient.
As the world upgrades, dollars no longer are at the center of the financial system. Currently, the dollar is the reserve currency, but in the future, assets will be able to be swapped through the best liquidity routes.
If you want a growth of trade and production to avoid unemployment and so on, you need also a growth of money. To trade more, you need more money. And you need, for internationally, to trade more internationally, you need more international money. And if you didn't have the growth of, if growth of reserves were no longer fed by the United States deficit, you would have a world deflation.
The Triffin paradox was presented as follows. The reserve currency needs perpetual debt and more money printing to support the global economy, but this causes high inflation domestically. The U.S. can't fight inflation and print money at the same time.
There's a huge issue out there associated with their regulatory barriers to entry that they have as large enterprises, and they will use the regulatory barriers to entry to keep themselves protected by that moat they can build around them. But I would just say, as technology evolves, IBM didn't become Microsoft. Microsoft didn't become Google. Google didn't become Facebook. Facebook didn't become Amazon, and Amazon's not going to become Circle or Coinbase. The world evolves, and the legacy competitors typically get defined away because the activity is new. So will the large financial institutions that now collect massive rents as a result of being centralized hierarchies in a world in which they can extract rents from doing that continue for some time period? Yes. Will they be particularly protected by the areas that are most regulated? Deposit taking and lending? Probably. Will a lot of the stuff around them that they do be taken away by new modes of commerce that render what they do irrelevant rather than replace it? Absolutely.
I think
the traditional world and the crypto world are merging, and those who follow the law will reap the most benefits from this convergence.
so. We have this complex multi-regulatory challenge. So imagine if you do it to every country, you will just go crazy, and it costs a lot of money. Millions of dollars are spent when you do bilateral connectivity. So this is not a sustainable process going forward.
Central banks, the BIS, the IMF, and the World Bank test and experiment with different technologies. They're only recreating excessively complex systems to accommodate multilateral transactions. The XRP ledger is capable of multilateral transaction, has proven itself since its inception.
Countries are working to connect current systems to deliver immediate results. Singapore and Thailand, for instance, have made quick progress by connecting fast payment systems, resulting in lower transaction costs for cross-border payments. But each connection between two countries must be tailor-made. This takes time and significant efforts. As more countries want to participate, we can end up with a tangled noodle bowl of bilateral connections.
The stigma around cryptocurrencies is understandable. It's one of the reasons why the banks are trying to use DLT technologies. However, open and permissionless systems provide a value that can't be replicated. As Glenn Hutchins stated, this is a computing paradigm. Ripple is individually working with licensed banks and institutions and is creating a system while following all the proper laws. The top of the banking industry can try to avoid this paradigm, but it's unavoidable, and they will eventually have to accept defeat, even though I think they already have. This is a World Bank document showing different diagrams of the XRP ledger and the Ethereum ledger connected with interledger protocol.
The SDR was developed in the late 1960s by the IMF, and it was developed because the IMF was afraid a dollar crisis might occur in the early 1970s. And the IMF was afraid for this dollar crisis because the US promised in 1944 at the Bretton Woods conference that the dollar would be as good as gold. And more countries were, exchanging their surplus dollars for gold in the late 1960s. And this made the US default on their promise. And In August 15, 1971, President Nixon told the US public in a live broadcast that he would stop the possibility to convert US dollars into physical gold. And that created a dollar crisis. IMF was afraid of this happening, and they always thought that there should be a successor for the dollar. There should be an international currency not connected to one country, which could be developed into a world reserve currency, and that's the history of the SDR.
The IMF was established to bail out the world. We're not crazy. These white papers and speeches are gearing us up for a digital currency system. When people hear reset, they assume it means everything changes overnight. But that's not the case. We're in a trend, and these papers and speeches are simply more evidence that the trend has not changed. Envying another man's happiness is madness. You wouldn't know what to do with it if you had it. The XX network is a privacy-focused chain. They have created a variety of tools like Speakeasy, which is a private Discord or Telegram, XX Messenger for private messaging, and Sleeve Wallet, which lets you hold your assets in a quantum-resistant wallet. If you're interested, please visit hub.xx.network for more information. Thanks everyone, I hope you enjoyed the show. Please take a moment to hit the thumbs up and subscribe. If you want to support this channel, please consider joining my Patreon, where you can find ad-free videos, Discord, exclusive videos, voice chats, and more.